Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, November the 5th, 2025. Today there is a full moon in Taurus, and in this video I will be looking at this lunation in some detail. But before I do that, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, November the 5th. And here is the chart for today, set for New York at noon. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as what is happening today, well, it is dominated by the full moon. The moon is in Taurus, making an opposition to the sun, and that is the definition of a full moon, moon opposition sun. So in this video I'm going to be talking at some length about this lunation, so I don't think that I want to say much about it at this stage. I mean, I'm going to, in the last part of the video, really go into detail about this full moon, but the main point is that it's a full moon which is fixed, and Taurus Scorpio, and so this full moon may perhaps bring to the surface some of the differences we have with other people and with the world at large. What can we discuss? Where can we be flexible? But where are we going to be uncompromising? And I think some people could be very uncompromising, with this lunation. And another thing about this lunation is it's relatively close to the cardinal points. So when I say cardinal points, I mean it's making let me qualify that. It's relatively close to making the 45-degree aspect of the cardinal point. The precise lunation is, it's 13 degrees 23 Taurus, so it's less than 2 degrees from the 45-degree aspect to the sun. In other words, we're moving to that part of the year where we are halfway between the equinox and the solstice. So in a couple of days' time, we, if you like, hit the astrological Halloween. I think that probably in my video for 2 days, probably not, maybe tomorrow, but probably more likely the day after, I'll be looking at the astrological Halloween when the sun is at exactly 15 degrees Scorpio. So, when you're dealing with a full moon, it might be a realization. Something finally becomes clear. We had the new moon 2 weeks ago at, I think it was at 28 Libra. And so now the lunar cycle is, reaching its peak. And from now on, of course, it's waning. So do you understand the truth? Do you get the truth? I mean, I'm not talking about some necessarily huge, major, life-shattering truth, but the truth that might have been sort of emerging, over the last few weeks. And really, that's pretty much it as far as the main aspect of the day. Mars opposition Uranus, which we had yesterday, is still very much around. You can see that Mars is at 0 degrees 50 Sagittarius. Just a reminder there that Mars is exactly quincunx my own Mars. My Mars is at 0 degrees 50 Taurus. So Mars quincunx my Mars. Maybe I should be careful there. I mean, quincunx is it can be a difficult aspect, and so maybe I'm going to be accident prone, or maybe something bad will happen. I'll try and be careful over the course of the day. So that Mars opposition Uranus is potentially a difficult aspect, as I discussed yesterday, and it can be accident prone. We've got Mars opposition Uranus at the same time as we have got the full moon. So that Mars opposition Uranus, may be stronger than usual and may be sort of hardwired into the lunation chart. But I'll be talking about that, at the end of the video. And so that's the picture. If we set the chart for New York, if we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, then then at noon, the moon is at 5 degrees Taurus. So the exact full moon, if you are in Australia, is not going to be until, well, how much is it going to 7? It's probably not going to be until early tomorrow morning. So it's not necessarily a full moon day if you're in Australia or New Zealand. However, the moon is still in Taurus. It's still opposition the sun in Scorpio. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you can still feel the build up to that to build up to the full moon. So I don't see why your overall experience should be that much difference than, for example, someone in the United States, but perhaps the full moon won't be, quite so intense. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So yesterday I talked about the growing impact of a sextile between the Earth and Jupiter. So the Earth is about 1 degree short of a sextile of Jupiter, and this sextile, I said yesterday that I regard it as being a relatively fortunate influence, and Mercury is involved. So you can see that Mercury is at 11 degrees Pisces. Remember, this is heliocentric Mercury, not geocentric Mercury. I know that geocentrically Mercury is in Sagittarius, but heliocentrically it's in Pisces. And Mercury is moving towards a trine of Jupiter. The Earth is kind of in the middle of Mercury and Jupiter. So you could say that Earth is on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint. And that's quite positive. So, however difficult things are, or they might seem, I don't know, I was just looking at what was happening today. Dick Cheney died. I think he was 84. 84, well, you think about the Uranus return, but I think his Uranus return was last year or the year before. I mean, I think I might talk about Dick Cheney, not today, obviously, because I want to talk about the full moon, but maybe I'll talk about him, in a day or two's time. It's always interesting to look at someone, a famous person, when we've got a time chart, and we can see what was happening when they died. As far as the Earth on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint, despite all the difficulties going on, and I know when I last looked, the markets were not looking particularly good. But because I'm making this video on a Tuesday morning, so I'm not really talking about Wednesday. That observation relates to Tuesday. So if you're looking at this on Wednesday, that would relate to yesterday. But things are a bit shaky, and it may be difficult to see the way forward. But maybe with Earth on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint, there is a way forward, and there is something to be optimistic about, and there's something that we can express in a positive way. Mercury trine Jupiter, and that positivity can come down to our planet, the planet on which we're living. But there are different kinds of positivity, and the universe is asking us to be positive in particular ways. And if we try to be happy in the wrong way, we're going to be miserable. So we've got to ask, what is the path forward? Where is the path of joy? And joy, of course, is nothing personal, because this is a heliocentric chart. It is, the joy of the world, something that the universe is going to revel in. So maybe with that Earth, Mercury, Jupiter configuration, we can find it, and we should perhaps be open-minded about where joy can be found. So now it's time to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, November the 5th, 2025. Aries. Mars is still making an opposition to Uranus. I mean, I talked at length about that opposition, and I indicated that perhaps you're going to be quite hasty. You're going to want things to happen. Mars has just changed sign. It's in Sagittarius. You're maybe still getting used to Mars being in Sagittarius. It is a high energy place for Mars to be, and you've got that fire. You want to sort of revel in that fire, perhaps, and You might think that you want everything at once. It's like after a period of drought, you've suddenly got everything you're looking for, but it can be too much of a good thing. You can be involved in too much, take the wrong initiatives, not think things through, and that could get you into trouble. And that's a situation that you really don't have to get into. Don't be impatient. Things will work themselves out. And also, with Mars moving into Sagittarius, it's a time to be asking questions. You've recently come to some answers, but perhaps these answers you've come to recently are about yourself, and they might have had sort of an emotional dimension. But now that Mars is in Sagittarius, you can perhaps afford to be sort of intellectually adventurous, and so by finding things out, you may get a better idea about what is possible, what can be done, and rather than thinking it has to all be about action, especially now with Mars opposition Uranus, it just could be that if you take something too quickly, you're in too much of a hurry to do something exciting, you could fall flat on your face. So that is kind of a warning. But also, I just want to tell you that you really can enjoy Mars moving through Sagittarius, and it's there until December the 15th. So as autumn starts to turn to winter, things do look quite good. Now, another thing to think about is where your priorities should be, and you should not forget that there is a full moon. Now, this full moon affects all of us in different ways. So as far as this full moon is concerned, I know that Mars has left Scorpio, and we see Scorpio as being quite a complicated sign, particularly when Mars is in there. And you might think you've left it, but there are still a few residual complications, a few things that you don't necessarily fully understand. You'd like to understand them, but maybe you also take the view you don't have to understand them. You'd like to move on. And this full moon might mean that you could be confronted with something that you thought you'd got away from. It just could be a complication. Or it could be someone deliberately trying to make something complicated. Maybe complicated in an emotional sense, or it could be financial. People can make money complicated. They can really try very hard to make money complicated when the actual solution is very simple, and that's how Aries likes to see it. And so with this moon opposition the sun, which of course is what a full moon is, it's an opportunity for you, Aries, to understand the truth about something, and perhaps to understand the truth about your own resources, what you have, what you don't have, where other people have the power, where perhaps other people are playing games. And a very difficult game can be when someone is playing games with money. People do it because a lot of people, I'm not saying a lot of people, but there are people out there who see money as a means of control. So if they owe you money, they might hold that money back, not necessarily because they can't afford to give you the money that's owed to you, but they just like to play games. They like to keep you on edge, and so you've got to be very aware of that and be open to the possibility of people doing things which is just stupid, just people playing silly games. And you want to make things as simple as possible, and I think you can make things as simple as possible. Certainly in a financial sense, I don't think you want any complications today, and you shouldn't be putting up with complications. And aside from what other people are doing, it's important as far as possible to be really down to earth with the moon in Taurus. And as far as is possible. I don't want to ground you. This is not a time for Aries to be grounded now that Mars is moving into Sagittarius. It's just that you need to get a certain balance there, and if there's anything financially that's been bothering you, or you haven't been prepared to face, now might be a good opportunity. Taurus. The moon is right in the middle of Taurus, well, certainly from a New York perspective at noon. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon will be at the beginning of Taurus, but it's still, the moon is pretty solidly in Taurus. And it is in a way quite strong. It's not just because the moon is exalted in Taurus. It's also because, at 15 degrees Taurus, at the center of the sign, it's making a semi-square to the Aries point. And so Taurus, I think that you at the moment have, a strong sense of who you are, and a sense of your grounding, and a sense of your selfhood, and that is good. And if you believe something is the case, then it probably really is the case. You don't have to wonder about whether you're doing the right thing. You don't have to worry about the ground on which you are standing. It's not quicksand. You're fine. But still, there is a full moon. The moon is making an opposition to the sun. And that opposition between the moon and the sun is across the prime axis of your chart. Moon in Taurus, sun in Scorpio. And so that might mean that there is a challenge. It could come from another person. You're trying to create things in your own way. You're trying to create stability for yourself, but someone else may be causing issues. And they might seem like unnecessary issues, unnecessary complications. You don't forget that it's not just, the moon is not just applying to an opposition of the sun. It's actually applying to an opposition of true black moon Lilith. And I'm not saying that true black moon Lilith opposition is such a big deal, but it just might create a few extra complications. So the question is, to what extent do you take other people seriously? You can't take them that seriously, because if you take people too seriously, well, they walk all over you, and they might indeed be creating complications that you just absolutely don't need. And also with the full moon in Taurus, it's a time when you might start to understand people in a new way. And you perhaps had people around you, maybe for some time, and you hadn't fully understood them. You didn't really know what their role was in your life, but now it's becoming clearer. And that's what the full moon is about, what the full moon can be about. It is about the realization. It is about the truth. Your truth. It's not anyone else's truth. Truth is something that is quite subjective. That you have a moment where it becomes clear, and you become clear what is the right path, and it becomes clear perhaps what another person's limitations are. And so that could be somewhat salutary, realizing that someone is not able to match your expectations. Or there is a positive side. I mean, it might be the case with this full moon that you realize that someone could be very good for you. Perhaps you'd underestimated someone, and now you see how powerful they are, how useful they could be. Although we should never forget that moon is opposition to sun. Moon is opposition to sun. And the moon, in a way, is a co-ruler of Taurus, because the moon is exalted in Taurus. I mean, I know that Venus is your main ruler, but moon has a strong relationship with Taurus. And so with moon opposition sun, it could be that you are at odds with another person. You can see that you're at odds with them. I don't know what kind of person this is. William Lilly, when he talks about the sun in the 17th century, he wrote Christian Astrology, and he described the nature of the sun, and he said that the sun was goggle-eyed and I think of medium height. So what does one mean? How does one interpret goggle-eyed? Well, you could say goggle-eyed is someone who wears glasses. A medium height is a problem. I don't know. I think one's being too literal there. Um, but you perhaps have reached a stage where you are able to reach conclusions about certain people. But don't be too down about it. There is a possibility, Taurus, that there could be feelings of negativity, that you might respond to this full moon by thinking that things really aren't good, that things are just going to get worse, and there could be just a real negativity could manifest. And Taurians can be negative. So if you find yourself just thinking the worst, perhaps being preoccupied by endings, and even death, for example. I mean, I'm not saying you should get preoccupied by death. I don't think there's anything wrong with being preoccupied by death. But if you find yourself thinking a lot about death and endings, I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's something very passing. So that's it, Taurus. I would like to be a little more positive. I think one can be positive about the full moon, because the full moon is showing you, what the truth of the matter is. And of course, the moon is in Taurus. It's not that your fundamental position is weak. It's not. You are in a strong position, but you also have some challenges, which I've tried to describe over the course of this piece on your sign. Gemini. We don't have a huge amount going on today, well, except for a full moon. I mean, a full moon is something quite serious, and this full moon might say something about how you're trying to organize yourself. I mean, that is certainly a possibility. You're trying to make the most of what you have, and you are perhaps aware of the rising chaos. I'm not saying things necessarily are chaotic, but sometimes it can feel as if the water level is just going up, and as the water level goes up, things get more difficult, boundaries get sort of broken down, and it may not be easy to know where to stop and where to start, and you might be of a view that you need to sort it out in your own way. I mean, if you are in a position where you're sorting things out with other people, you might feel the pressure. And when you're talking about organization and making sense of things, I often think that there is a power equation. The power equation, is it you who is in control of the organizational process? You're trying to do things in your own way, at your own pace, or perhaps you feel that someone else is bearing down on you. They're telling you that you need to get yourself together, that you feel that you're organizing things, sorting things out, not necessarily because you immediately want to, but because you're trying to shut someone up, or you're trying to appease someone. So there is a difference there. And I think that, Gemini, that you're perhaps going to want to do things on your own. And so if you want to do things on your own, at your own pace, then maybe the sooner you get going on it, the better. You don't want to wait for external pressure to manifest, because that would not necessarily be desirable. But if you are dealing with things which frankly you don't really want to deal with, it's just messy, and you'd rather be doing something else. But if you are doing that, then don't be despondent. It's possible, Gemini, that you just find something that just comes out of nowhere, something almost in the mud, symbolically at least in the mud. You're somewhere where you don't want to be. There's mud, decay, doom, gloom, and then you find something that might cheer you up. Maybe it's a realization. Maybe you literally find something you were looking for. And it could be that, where you've got things that are unpleasant and things you don't really want to touch, that's where the opportunities lie. And it just might be just, a discovery. And at the moment, Gemini, there is a certain amount of negativity around the place. I was talking to Taurus, and I was suggesting to Taurus, there could be moments when Taurus might be concerned about all the things that could go wrong, almost in a sort of quite deathly kind of way. And yeah, you have all these concerns, but again, it's not about you. It's just about the world around you, and you might see a sudden opportunity here. Maybe another person's misery is almost, in a really perverse way, is kind of a good omen. It's a sign that maybe you can in some way take advantage of the situation. Not like taking advantage of another person, but you can perhaps balance it, and it can be a situation where, when there's a lot of stress, you suddenly feel just a lot better for some reason. So that really is a possibility, and we shouldn't forget the heliocentric chart. So I looked at the heliocentric chart, earlier in this video, and what we have in this heliocentric chart is Mercury in Pisces making a trine to Jupiter. Let me just remind you what I was looking at. Here was the heliocentric chart. There's Mercury in Pisces making a trine to Jupiter. It's making a sextile to the Earth. So this Mercury trine Jupiter, when I talked about Mercury trine Jupiter, I was saying that it does represent some kind of happiness, but a sort of cosmic happiness. It's not that you'll necessarily be able to be happy in the usual ways, but the universe wants you to be happy, wants you to revel in something, and it's perhaps up to you to find it, and it's something that is very real and is of real quality, of spiritual quality. So happiness can be found in many different ways, but if you want real happiness, there's just one way you need to look for, and I think with that Mercury trine Jupiter, you can find real satisfaction today, in spite of everything, in spite of the pressure and feeling you have to do things, having to do things you absolutely don't want to do, but you just go through it anyway. And in the end, perhaps almost to your surprise, things will or might come together. Cancer. I don't think there's much that you have to worry about today, Cancer. I mean, I know there's a full moon, and so full moons often have a big impact on Cancerians because it does matter. The moon is a planet. Okay, it's a satellite technically, but the moon is a body that you're very sensitive to, and so when you've got a full moon, you can feel it, and it's clear to you, Cancer, that something is changing. What happened a couple of weeks ago, you kind of felt that there was a new cycle with the new moon. When was it October the 7th? No, not October the 7th. It was that was the last full moon. The last new moon, sorry, I should know. So we had a full moon on October the 21st. We had a new moon. So since October the 21st, you perhaps been aware that something has changed, and this change could have taken many forms. I mean, it could have been something to do with your home and your relationship with your family, and you felt that something was changing, and now you've got the full moon. You see the full picture. But I don't think that this full moon is especially stressful. I think that you're able to understand what you can do. Remember this full moon is in Taurus, so moon in Taurus, the moon is exalted in Taurus, so this is a good time for you. I mean, I think, and you understand what kind of what kind of balance you should be striving for, and it may be with this full moon that you have to meet people halfway. There are things that you want to do, that you enjoy doing, and maybe this has been particularly clear while the sun has been moving through Scorpio. And with this full moon, perhaps the challenge is to be just a bit more open about what you are doing. And, perhaps you haven't in the past or recent past really wanted to share. Why should you? Other people, they have their own way of doing things. They might not understand. That can be a Cancerian thing. I mean, Cancer can be quite a secretive sign, and you may also, say that or think that if you were to try to explain what you were doing, there might be a lack of comprehension. But with this full moon, maybe something does have to be revealed, and it's not necessarily about something being revealed to you, but maybe you doing the revealing. And it's perhaps important to watch other people's reaction, because if you're trying to think about the future and thinking about who is going to be useful in the future, who do you want to be part of your life in the future, you say something, you do something, and then you watch the reaction. And by looking at the reaction, you can get a reasonably good idea about who, for example, can be trusted and who is not going to be there for you. And we shouldn't forget that as a Cancerian, loyalty is extremely important to you. You are able to give incredible amounts of loyalty to those close to you, to your family, your loved ones. But in the same way, you expect a huge amount of loyalty. And maybe with this full moon, you might have an understanding of who you can trust. You just watch their reactions. You say something, you do something, you ask for something, and you watch the reactions, and then it becomes clear. And as a result of that, you might be able to sort of reconfigure your social life in some respects. Perhaps your social circle needs to be just a little bit smaller. Perhaps it's got a bit cluttered, and the full moon just gives you an indication of perhaps who can be trusted. And the moon is not just making an opposition to the sun; it is making an opposition to true Black Moon Lilith. And with moon opposition true Black Moon Lilith, you are perhaps starting to understand certain things about the darkness, your darkness, other people's darkness. If anyone is trying to hide in the shadows, you can see it. And if anyone's trying to hide something from you, they're not going to be successful. And the darker the deeds, the more clear they will be. So that is again, another reason why you might want to why you might want to just reconfigure your social environment, so that you're in future going to be hanging out with the right people. That anyone who is untrustworthy or is disloyal, you can sort of distance yourself from them. Leo. Full moons are important, and this full moon is certainly important from a Leo perspective. We've got moon in Taurus, opposition to sun. Don't forget the sun is your ruler, and this full moon could be stretching you. I mean, that's perhaps the aim of this full moon. I mean, every full moon in its own way is challenging, but this full moon could be particularly stretching. It's asking you to go beyond yourself, not to take any sort of huge risks or anything like that, but instead to do things which maybe you're not entirely comfortable with. Now, that doesn't mean dangerous. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm sort of talking about perhaps taking a social risk, maybe even a professional risk, and feeling that you have to do something, you have to make your position clear, and realizing that it's just not enough to just hang out in your own private world. That's Sun in Scorpio. I mean, I think that while the Sun has been moving through Scorpio, you have been tempted to look at things in one way, in a way that seems to be most comfortable. and then the moon makes the opposition to the sun, and yeah, that's a challenge. And the moon, you could say, is the outside world. It could be other people, and it could be about just pressure to show the world what you can do. And it's all very well just sitting on what you have. Maybe you've got a lot of talents, you've got abilities, but you can't just keep them to yourself. And so that full moon may be asking you to turn up the volume, to show people what you can do. So that is one way of looking at it. Now, this full moon is across quite an important axis in your chart, an axis that is connected with home, family, and also work. And it could be about the balance between home, family on one side, and work. So if that balance comes into focus, it seems to me that you should probably try to give the emphasis to the work, to whatever is done in public. So even if you're not working, if you have a choice between your private world and that sort of outside world, if possible, you should go for the public world, because you need to be seen, and I don't think you're necessarily especially comfortable, being seen at the moment. You would rather just follow the line of least resistance and just fall back to that world where everything is safe and secure and you don't have to ask complicated questions. So that's certainly a way in which the full moon can work. But alternatively, it just may say something about your ideas about your work. It could say something about your career. It may, in certain cases, represent a realization. You realize something about your career path with this Taurus moon, and it suddenly becomes obvious. And it had been building up, but now you see the truth, and now you have the truth. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I mean, it could be that you feel that you've gone as far as you can in a particular job, or also it could be that if you haven't been working, for one reason or another, this full moon might encourage you to change that. You might feel that you need to get a job, or you need to get a different job, a better paid job, a job that is more in keeping, with who you are. Whatever it is, there could be a realization there, and likewise, there could be a realization about what's going on in your own home, and you might see, when you look at what's happening at home, but in some respects it's too limiting, but it's not giving you the opportunities you need. So I'm not saying it's going to be difficult or problematic, this full moon. I think it's just going to force you to make some decisions, and you're going to make those decisions because you have a new awareness. Virgo. Mercury is in early Sagittarius still. Just a reminder there. And Mercury is quite close to Mars, and so you're getting used to Mercury being in Sagittarius, and the danger of Mercury being in Sagittarius is, strangely, as it is Sagittarius, you think that Sagittarius is quite an active sign. It's a fast sign, but there is some danger that you maybe feel a bit stuck with Mercury in Sagittarius, and you might be tempted to lash out. I mean, that is possible. And the reason you might lash out is just because you feel that you don't have enough opportunities to express yourself. So if you don't really know how to express yourself, and you're stuck in one place, and you've got Mars opposition Uranus, and Mars moving to a conjunction of Mercury, then you might do something, because you feel stuck. And I think at the moment, Virgo, it's important to give yourself variety. You shouldn't feel that there's only one way of doing things. And it might be that, with the full moon, today's full moon, you have an opportunity to maybe see things in a different way, in a more expansive way. You had perhaps been used to a certain set of preconditions, a certain set of facts, and you thought that was the way it was, and now you have a chance to see things in a different way. And so if you are feeling stuck, then maybe you need to do something about it. You don't have to take risks. I mean, you shouldn't take risks. I mean, remember that Mars is making an opposition to Uranus. Okay, that opposition between Mars and Uranus was exact yesterday, but we've still got Mars opposition Uranus. And, part of the problem with Mars and Mars opposition Uranus is it is quite, a dangerous aspect. It's quite an impulsive aspect. And you want to be in a position where you're acting in a way that, is natural and free flowing, where you're not forcing things. And so giving yourself exposure to new ideas and new concepts with this full moon is possibly the way forward. What you don't want to do is, get stuck on facts, factual details. It's easy to get stuck on those details, to think that they are really important, the be all and end all, when they're not. You have to go beyond the facts. And I think that full moon should enable you to do that. And at the same time, Virgo, it's a day when you can be lucky. I mean, after all, if we look at the heliocentric view, I mean, if we put the Sun at the center of the solar system, so here's the heliocentric chart, Mercury is moving towards a trine of Jupiter over the next day or two. And Mercury is also making a sextile to the Earth. So, Mercury is in not such a bad position heliocentrically. And with that Mercury trine Jupiter, there's an opportunity for you to be positive, to see the opportunity. And it's not just any opportunity. It's not just an opportunity that comes from your ego and your very subjective imaginings. It's about the opportunity that comes from the world, that comes from the universe even, because this is a heliocentric trine, and certain people are perhaps cut out to do something special, to do something which is in accord with the short-term universal plan. And if you can align yourself, then of course you're going to be happy. Anyone's going to be happy if they're aligned with the cosmos. And so with Mercury trine Jupiter, perhaps that's something you can strive for. I'm not saying you're going to be successful, but if you are feeling at all negative and you're just too into yourself and your own issues, then try to look at things in a different way. I think the moon in Taurus is going to help, and then you get into the moon in Taurus, and then you can start to get into the Mercury trine Jupiter heliocentrically. So what you want to do is you just want to elevate, move yourself from one level of Virgo existence to another level, and it can all be very natural. So in that sense, Virgo, it might be up to you. I think that you can have a very satisfying day, provided you're open to new possibilities. But it's not just random possibilities. There are a particular set of possibilities which the universe has created, and it is created for you possibly to take advantage of them. If you can. You might decide to just look down, to look away. In that case, you may not be able to to have a great day. But I think you can have a great day, but you've just got to be open to those new possibilities. Libra. There is a full moon today, and you could say that the full moon is really the only thing going on. It's the only exact aspect that we need to worry about. Now, this full moon is in Taurus, and it's not a sign that you necessarily have any great rapport with. And as far as what this full moon is about, well, I think that it's a full moon that is perhaps asking you to take things seriously. I don't think it's a day for being too light-hearted. Everything is complicated, and just because something is complicated doesn't mean there's a problem. But things just are complicated. Things aren't what they seem to be on the surface, and so be ready to deal with things on many different levels, and don't get caught up on surface appearances. I mean, you have to deal with surface appearances to begin with. You have to see what might be possible. So you look at something on the surface and you see, oh, this is interesting. And then with this full moon, you perhaps need to just go into things just a bit more deeply and sort of understand what is below the surface. And perhaps this full moon is going to facilitate that. And this full moon, therefore, might be representative of some kind of sort of process of discovery. And full moons are about discovery, and they can be. And they're about seeing the truth of the matter. And maybe in the past you've treated something as being just too easy, too simple. You thought the answers were simple, and the full moon is telling you that things maybe aren't so simple. And what happens when you see the truth? For example, it might be the truth about the way you feel. I mean, that's important. It might sound just too subjective, but when we realize our own feelings, and perhaps we realize the intensity of our own feelings, and perhaps even the darkness of our own feelings, that can be liberating. But it could also be about something more mundane. It could, for example, be about money. You thought that something of a financial nature was straightforward, that people were being straightforward, they were being open and honest, but maybe this isn't the case. Maybe this full moon indicates that financially things just are a lot more complicated than you thought at the beginning. And that's not a bad thing, because if you are aware that something is complicated, then you're in a position to do something about it, and you're able to look for answers. Now, in the process, Libra, there may be moments where you do feel rather negative. It might seem as if things, really are not working, or you perhaps see the real difficulties of things. I wasn't going to say the horror. It's not about horror, but it's still having a negativity there, and thinking that something really is bad and it's just not going to get any better. So you just might have that general view. And so if you do find yourself becoming very negative and thinking the worst, it's perhaps a good sign. It just shows that you're aligning with the world, and because you can be negative and even be ever so slightly fearful, that gives you the impetus, I hope, to ask the questions that need to be answered, and just to to keep going. And one thing but one perhaps should notice is that Venus is at 28 degrees Libra. So you might ask, well, so what, 28 Libra? What's important about Venus being in 28 Libra? Well, okay, you could say, well, Venus is about to leave Libra and move into Scorpio. But Venus is now conjunct the degree of the new moon on October the 21st. So there was a new moon 2 weeks ago. And now that Venus is conjunct the degree of the new moon, that is quite powerful. And you might finally understand something. You might understand what something was all about. The new moon 2 weeks ago was a new beginning. Particularly is it's a Libra new moon, a new beginning for you. And it just could be that you didn't really understand that new moon, and it was a complicated new moon, because as I said at the time, this new moon almost feels like a full moon. It was kind of like the beginning of the end, you know, the last chapter, the beginning of the last chapter. And now that Venus is on the degree of that new moon, that means, Libra, that there may just be a real moment of understanding, just before Venus leaves Libra, just before Venus leaves Libra and moves into Scorpio. It could just come together, and I think the full moon is really going to help you. Now, at first, I think that your reaction might be quite negative. You might think this is just something you just don't want to know. But if you're ready to just go with it, and you're able to sort of dig deep, I think that things won't just become clear, but you're going to be able to transform yourself. So what's perhaps started off as a feeling of great sort of negativity, a feeling that things just weren't going to get any better, instead will be just a feeling of just being in the right place. You know what's in front of you. You know what you have to do. Scorpio. Full moon. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. That is the major issue today. I don't know whether you can call a full moon an issue, but for some people it might be an issue. But this full moon is right across the main axis of your chart. You've got the Sun in Scorpio, the moon in Taurus, and so this full moon, could very much put the emphasis on relationships, how you get on with other people, and what impact you are having on other people. And you've got to be open-minded, and you've perhaps also got to be self-critical. You haven't got all the answers. Your behavior isn't always perfect. I know that Scorpio is supposed to be a sensitive sign, but in certain areas, in certain situations, you can be quite insensitive, or appear to be insensitive. I mean, it's not really that you're being insensitive, it's just that your sensitivity is focused in a different direction, and you're not thinking about or feeling about another person. And this full moon, you've got the moon in Taurus in your opposite sign. It's a strong moon. I mean, the moon is in its exaltation, and so moon in Taurus could represent another person who perhaps requires your attention, and you need to be aware of who they are, what they're offering, and also where there might be a difference of opinion, because it is Sun opposition moon. So where you're dealing with an opposition, you are potentially dealing with a difference, and so it matters that you understand other people, and you understand how you are different from them, and it also matters that you are respectful. I think it's very important to be respectful, and if you're respectful to another person, that means, well, they might return that respect, and you might be dealing also with someone who's really got something to offer you. If you give them a chance. And the full moon might be a moment of realization. When we talk about realizations and full moons, one tends to be negative about it. One to say a full moon is all about realizing that someone has been mistreating you, or is exploiting you, or just is a bad apple. But there is another way of looking at a full moon, and this full moon, particularly as the moon is in Taurus, might just be becoming aware of what someone has to offer, but you don't necessarily have to do everything on your own. And in general, if we're talking about relationships, the full moon, it can represent a change. It can represent one phase of a relationship changing into another phase. Now, that's more likely to be the case if you're dealing with a relationship which is relatively recent. If you've had a relationship with someone for decades, then you could say that Taurus full moons, they happen every year. So if you've been in a relationship with someone for 20 years, well, you would have had 20 Taurus full moons and perhaps more. So it does depend, but sort of relationships which have are relatively short-lived, or sorry, relatively recent, this full moon could be particularly important because it just allows you to see another side to someone's personality. Now, another thing still going on today is Mars opposition Uranus. I mean, I talked at length about Mars opposition Uranus yesterday, but the aspect still very much in force. So Mars is, of course, your ruler. It's opposition Uranus. Uranus is a disruptive planet. It's a revolutionary planet, and it can be enlightening. But Mars opposition Uranus, you just have to be a bit careful. You don't want to do anything that is too extreme. And extremism. Well, some Scorpios can be extremists, and at the moment, that inner extremist in you is perhaps quite close to the surface. So if you are planning on doing something dramatic, do think about whether it's really the right thing to do. And as I've already been suggesting, do consider the social environment, consider other people, and what they want, what they can handle. And so a bit of sensitivity on your part, both to yourself and to your own limits, and also to other people's limits, could be worthwhile. Not just worthwhile, but I think it's also having that sensitivity. Well, it's the responsible thing to do. And so that that's it, Scorpio. I think that main thing is this full moon, and do give people a chance, and be aware that it's not all down to you. Sagittarius. The Mars opposition Uranus aspect that I have been talking about quite a lot recently is in force, still in force. Mars is the beginning of your sign. Uranus is still in Gemini. Okay, it's going to go back into Taurus very soon, but we still have this Mars opposition Uranus. And so with this Mars opposition Uranus, I would have said that you continue, or you should continue, to be careful. Mars opposition Uranus is potentially a dramatic aspect. It can cause a lot of difficulty. It can cause a lot of chaos, and if you don't watch it, you could get yourself into trouble. And this Mars opposition Uranus may additionally say something about relationships. So relationships can't be taken for granted, and you mustn't assume that you can do what you want, and you might think that something you say or something you do is of no consequence, but it might be of consequence, and it might be misinterpreted. So that would be something that I would suggest that you really need to think about. And perhaps Sagittarius, what is also needed is some degree of discipline and order, and maybe following a plan. And that's maybe where the full moon comes in. We've got a full moon in Taurus, and this full moon might remind you that things are a bit up in the air. Things are still quite chaotic. Maybe things are more chaotic now that you've got Mercury and Mars in Sagittarius. Things are going all over the place. And you don't want too much chaos. You do have to bring some order. And if you open your eyes, you can see how things might be going wrong. You can see that things might be piling up, and perhaps it hadn't been clear to you. You'd been looking the other way, but now you can see it. And because you can see it, that gives you a chance maybe to do something about it. And it's not something that you necessarily want to do, but given that you have the knowledge, given that your eyes are open and you see something that kind of upsets you, it's wrong. You can at some level, well, at some level you don't really want to be bothered with it, but given you've got that awareness, I think it is a time to start to to start to move forward and to work out, really, what needs to be done. And the sooner you get it out of the way, the better. But it's not just the full moon. It's not just something, just one day. I think that perhaps between now and maybe the new moon. So we've got a new moon coming up. When is the new moon? So the new moon is going to be on November the 20th. So perhaps between now and the new moon, you have a chance to sort things out. So to have a target, perhaps, over the next fortnight. I mean, I know that sounds boring, but it's not the only thing going on. But I think that might be, how the full moon, influences you. And on a different note, as far as how you get on with other people, Mars moving into Sagittarius opposition Uranus, I've just been talking about that, and you could say, well, that is quite a negative thing, quite a dangerous thing. But there's another way of looking at it. Mars moving into Sagittarius does make you more exciting. And even Mars opposition Uranus makes you more exciting. You're not someone who people just ignore. There's nothing trivial about you, and people are looking for excitement, and maybe that is something that you can provide. And I think that your ability to get on with people, provided you show some restraint, you don't want to upset people, you don't want to do anything crazy, but if you make the effort, I think you can get on with people extremely well. And you're helped by the fact that heliocentrically there is a trine between Mercury and Jupiter. So Mercury in heliocentric Pisces. Let me just show you the heliocentric chart. So here's the heliocentric chart. There's Jupiter in Cancer, your ruler, and Mercury, ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign, is in Pisces, heliocentric Pisces, making that trine to Jupiter, also making a trine to Earth. And that heliocentric trine between Mercury and Jupiter does indicate that at a higher level, you know what people want. You know how to attract people, and you don't have to do crazy stuff. And if you are yourself and you show just a little bit of restraint, I think that you can find that other people really start to appreciate your presence, and they are attracted to you. Capricorn, there's not a great deal going on today. I mean, we've got the full moon. I mean, obviously the full moon is quite an important event, but aside from the full moon, there aren't really any exact aspects, at least from a sort of a Greenwich Mean Time perspective. And so a lot does hinge on this full moon. Now, this full moon, I wouldn't have said is necessarily directly relevant to you in a huge way, but still, full moons do affect all of us. And so what is this about? I think that this full moon is to some extent about your independence, and it's about doing things that you want to do that are important to you, and make you feel good. It's not necessarily a time where you should be worrying too much about other people and perhaps about society in general. But society in general can still have an impact. And maybe with this full moon, you're very aware of expectations. The expectations of society, perhaps the expectations of your friends. What is okay? What is it okay to do? I mean, of course, people are very influenced by wider trends. They don't want to do anything which is weird or which is even too individualistic. But individualism does matter, Capricorn, for you. And if there is something that really matters to you, that you enjoy doing, it might be a bit weird, it might be out of fashion, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Some things are timeless. And so, Capricorn, do really stick to what you believe in, and be ready to trust yourself, even if there is a lot of pressure. And with this full moon, I think you could feel a distance, just a distance from other people who you might normally have been quite close to. But today, not just today, but maybe over the next couple of weeks, between now and a new moon, I think there's a new moon on November the 20th, between now and a new moon, you're just aware of that difference. I mean, it could in certain cases be a gulf. And I'm not suggesting that you're going to be alone, or you're going to be isolated from the rest of society, but the difference does matter, and your individualism does matter, and that should be you. That should be your approach, and it needn't be about conflict. It's not like you have to get other people to appreciate your view of the world, or that you have to fit in. You can do your thing, other people can do their thing, and if there's a difference of opinion, why bother with that difference of opinion? So it might be just two things working in completely different ways, and if that means that there are going to be moments of isolation, well, so be it. And one reason why you might want to be ever so slightly wary of other people, it could be your own reactions. And if you are pressurized today, you could react in surprising ways. As a Capricorn, you're an earth sign. You can sometimes have a very earthy way of expressing yourself and using particular words. And today you could say things which it could be crude. It could be offensive. I mean, not crude or offensive as far as you're concerned. You just want to say it as it is. So you can be very, very plain in your speaking. Plain as in making things absolutely obvious. But in the process, your vocabulary may be somewhat colourful, and relative to you. I mean, it's relative to the normal way you do communicate. And it's not just about what you say, it's about what you think. I mean, your mind is quite busy at the moment, and right now some Capricorns might be having some rather strange thoughts that could be disturbing, could be negative, and you may sort of catch yourself going down sort of a very negative, even destructive route, perhaps having bad feelings about other people, and not having nice thoughts. But that's okay. I mean, why should you have nice thoughts? And so that might be one way that this is working. Alternatively, Capricorn, you might just have a natural interest in terms of things that are unpleasant. I mean, unpleasantness as a Capricorn, it's part of the human condition. And so because it's part of the human condition, you're almost comfortable with it. I mean, not necessarily comfortable with it, but it's not going to send you running into the hills. And so perhaps you can deal with things that other people can't deal with. And maybe in terms of what you're able to talk about, you can talk about things that terrify other people, or that other people just want to just ignore it, brush it under the carpet. But I think you are very real at the moment, perhaps more real than most of the other signs. And so that down-to-earth approach is not going to be to everyone's taste, but I think it could be to some people's tastes. I mean, I think there's a good chance that you can find people on your wavelength, but they have to be on your wavelength. It's not a time, Capricorn, for you to be compromising. Aquarius, full moon. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. I'm spending a lot of time talking about this full moon. And you could say there isn't much else to talk about because there aren't so many aspects today. And, this full moon, therefore, kind of dominates the day. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the full moon, I don't think is until early tomorrow, but it'll get there. And even if the full moon isn't exact today, the moon is in Taurus, the sun is in Scorpio. uh, Taurus and Scorpio are both fixed signs. You, Aquarius, you're a fixed sign. So I think it very likely that this full moon is going to have some impact on you. So as far as what this full moon is about, it could be about your need to ground yourself. I think that recently Aquarians have been perhaps thinking about what they need to achieve, what they need to do, and you perhaps have been sort of looking at the outer world and perhaps thinking about what kind of impact are you having. And that might, for example, related to your career, your business, or another set of ambitions. And I have said over the last few weeks that it is a time when many Aquarians have been quite ambitious. But with this full moon, you need to perhaps look at things in a new way. Where is it? Not just where is it all going, but how much can you handle, and are you secure? Because if you're not secure, if you're not properly grounded, then you can be as successful as you like, but it's all very unstable. It could just all fall apart if the foundations are not sorted out. And so today, not just today, this full moon, the impact of this full moon, you could argue, lasts for a couple of weeks. It is perhaps a time for you to make sure that the foundations are sorted out. Whatever you're doing, think about the foundations, and don't put a huge amount of effort building something, trying to create something, if the foundations aren't sorted out. I mean, it may be that you have to clear things away. You've been building something, maybe something needs to be restarted, and the full moon allows you to see what you've accomplished so far. You can see the good things, but you can perhaps also see the bad things and where you might have missed things. So, okay, if you've got something a bit wrong, you maybe can make some adjustment. I mean, it could be, I'm not saying this is going to be the case, but it could be that you have to partially start again, and because the foundations are not fully 100% secure. But you don't want to exaggerate. I mean, you don't want to just destroy things just for the sake of it. Only do it if necessary, and taking a foundational approach. I think that really is the right way forward. And part of the thing is you being able to be realistic. You can see things for the way they are, and this is not just about the three-dimensional universe. It's also maybe about people, the foundations of maybe various relationships, and thinking about what those foundations actually are. And this full moon, it could well have a relationship angle. I mean, don't forget that moon opposition sun. The sun is ruler of Leo, your opposite sign. So the full moon could say something about how relationships are developing and your perception of these relationships and what you're thinking about other people. And in terms of what you're thinking, you could be thinking that maybe things aren't as they should be. I mean, you're perhaps at the moment, Aquarius, capable of being quite suspicious. You don't necessarily take people at face value. You look at their motivations, and you're wondering, are their motivations really honest? Are they hiding something? And you don't want to exaggerate. You don't want to create a problem where none exists. But you are capable of looking at things in quite a deep way, and perhaps coming up with the right answers. And that the answer might be that certain people are up to no good, and you might have a certain nose for evil or misdeeds or dishonesty. If you think about it, and if you really analyze it, you'll come to the right answers. And that perhaps goes back to the foundations of everything. You need to be looking for the evil, looking for the rot, looking for the distortions, and once you're aware of all that, then you can start building something which really can last. Pisces. The opposition aspect between Mars and Uranus is still very much in operation. So, Mars at noon New York time today, Wednesday, is at 0 degrees 50 Sagittarius, opposition Uranus at 0 degrees 6 Gemini. And this Mars-Uranus opposition does matter, and it's an opposition which can certainly be disruptive. I mean, it's not an easy influence, and it can mess things up. And perhaps also it's about your own desire for freedom, the freedom to do what you want, the freedom to strive for whatever you want. So if something is important to you, then you're going to want to go for it, and you won't care too much about how much damage or disruption you cause in the process. But I don't think it need go that far. I mean, with Mars moving into Sagittarius, Mercury already in Sagittarius, it is a time when you are ambitious, and if you're ambitious, then if you're really ambitious, you're not going to want anything to get in your way. And it could be that if you really want to pursue your ambitions, if something really is important to you, in the process, something might have to be broken. Someone might have to be upset. I mean, it is possible, and you perhaps have to get your priorities right. And while all this is going on, we've got a full moon, and this full moon in Taurus, and full moons are often about realizations, seeing something for what it is, and it can be about understanding. So Pisces, there could be moments of understanding with this full moon, and it could be that you had taken certain things for granted, certain ideas for granted, certain beliefs. So whatever it is you believe in, it could be religious, it could be political, it could be philosophical. It is good to have beliefs. I mean, I know that beliefs get a bad reputation because people think of fanaticism and so on. But beliefs can just make things much easier. We don't want to be in a position where we have to constantly make decisions. Every time we get a new input, we just try to work out what to do, what is the moral approach. But beliefs are a wonderful shortcut, and they can take away that decision making. But of course, that can be incredibly dangerous, can't it? Because if a belief takes over, then individual freedom and morality can just be thrown out of a window as well. But now with this full moon, you have to realize that some of the things you believe in, some of the things you thought you believed in, are not necessarily as useful as you thought. They are in some ways flawed, and you've got to perhaps contrast the facts with the belief, and you might come across facts, things that are completely obvious to you, which contradict what you believe in. And it's easy to just ignore the contradictions and just to ignore the facts. I mean, don't they call this cognitive dissonance? And there could be some cognitive dissonance today. And the cognitive dissonance is, you have a belief, but the facts don't support this belief. And there's that book. Was it by Festinger and others, talking about cognitive dissonance? And I think it was the book that sort of launched cognitive dissonance, and about sort of some cult in America in the late 1950s, and they believed that the aliens were going to come on a particular day, and they were all prepared for it, and nothing happened. And so what do? Well, the cognitive dissonance is to say, how do you deal with that cognitive dissonance? You have a belief that the aliens are going to arrive and that the earth is going to be, falling apart or whatever. Well, you could say, well, we were praying so hard that the aliens didn't come. So that is one way of dealing with the cognitive dissonance. But I'm not saying it's going to be like that. But you have to take a fact-orientated approach. Look at the facts. If the facts contradict your beliefs, then maybe your beliefs need to be changed. Maybe even your beliefs have to be thrown out of the window. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 39, which is obstruction. Not a great hexagram, at least on the surface. Obstruction really does indicate that we are blocked, that we can't go any further. And what do we do when we can't go any further? Well, we've got a choice. We can stay where we are. I mean, that is certainly a possibility. We're not taking on any more risk. Or we could return to where we came from. So a retreat might be a good approach. Now, we have third line from the bottom moving, and the third line from the bottom moving represents the limit. So if you take this hexagram obstruction, you've got two trigrams. So a trigram is a set of 3 lines. So you've got 2 trigrams in a hexagram. So if this third line from the bottom is moving, that means that we kind of have a choice. So the third line from the bottom could be the leader of the trigram, the top line in the trigram. And that could be us perhaps having a certain amount of leadership, but also knowing our limits. So we can lead the trigram. And if we take the view that we are going to lead the trigram, we're going to be saying, well, we're going to have authority. People will take us seriously, and they will listen to us. And they're not expecting us necessarily to do anything crazy. And if we say enough is enough, people will accept us. People will accept what I say, what we say. They will accept our restraint. Now that's the right choice, but there is a temptation to move into the top trigram, because this is as far as we go in the bottom trigram. But if we try to move into the top trigram, very different picture here, because the bottom 3 lines represent something very solid. It represents solidity. It's very very earthy. The top 3 lines represent the abyss, water, but the rather dangerous side of water, not the lake, but the abyss. That the Marianas Trench, the lake, the ocean which has got a depth which is almost unlimited. So we can go to the top of the trigram and we can stay there, or we can try and skip to the top trigram. And if we skip to the top trigram, that could be disastrous. We're moving into a completely different situation. So it is best that we stay where we are. We stay where we know we're safe. And there is also a sense of responsibility here, because if we try to jump into the top trigram, jump into danger, if we decide not to, to ignore the obstruction and to just keep going, then we might not just make things bad for ourselves, but we could also make things bad for other people as well. So the advice is very simple. We with this third line moving, we need to stop. We need to retreat. And it's not a disgrace. It's absolutely the right thing to do. Everyone understands. We're perhaps exercising our authority, and things are holding together, and that leads to the second hexagram. What 39 moves to, and it moves to holding together. Hexagram number 8, and hexagram number 8. Does indicate that there might be some kind of threat out there. That's why people have to hold together. That's why people are not moving into danger. We could move into danger, but it's not a good idea to move into danger. And everyone needs to be aware that that things are difficult. That if we take risks, we might be punished for taking risks. Mars is opposition Uranus still, and we've got a full moon. It's quite a dangerous day. And if we rely on other people, trust other people, let them trust us, and if anyone's in trouble, we can be there to help, and that is the right approach for today. So basic message is, don't take risks. If you're facing danger, retreat. If you're doing something that's too difficult, retreat. It's okay. There's no disgrace, and tomorrow is another day. So let me finish by talking about the full moon. And there is certainly a full moon today. That's why I've got the full moon on the thumbnail, and in the top right, that is a full moon. And so here is the chart of the full moon. So this full moon takes place November the 5th, 2025 at 1:19 p.m. London time. So the full moon is going to be relatively early in the morning if you're in the Americas, early afternoon in Europe, Africa. It's going to be quite late in the evening if you're in Australia or New Zealand. So this full moon is at 13 degrees 23 Taurus. And that means you've got moon at 13 degrees 23 Taurus, you've got sun 13-23 degrees Scorpio. And it's in fixed signs, so this full moon could represent a certain amount of stubbornness. Particularly, you've got an opposition. You've got two forces, sun in Scorpio, moon in Taurus, both really into themselves, into their particular view. No one wants to budge, and that could be how this full moon feels. And so it might not be entirely easy. But you could also say that this is simply the nature of the Taurus new moon. Every year you're going to get a Taurus new moon. Every year you're going to get moon in Taurus and sun in Scorpio. So that perhaps is not so surprising. So when you've got a full moon, you have to look at the overall chart, because the full moon is kind of fixes a planetary positions, so at the time of that full moon. So we know that at the time of this full moon, Mars is opposition Uranus. Mars was exactly opposition Uranus yesterday. It's still, that Mars opposition Uranus is quite close, and so it's another opposition. And this Mars opposition Uranus is, it's quite a dangerous aspect. It's about danger, and because Uranus and Mars are involved, it is also about stubbornness. Okay, it's in mutable signs, so perhaps not as difficult as if it would be in fixed signs, but some people are holding firm, and they're quite capable of doing crazy things if they're pushed far enough or hard enough. So that's that is really something to really think about. So we really need to look at, again, what is going on at the time of this full moon. Now some aspects of this full moon are not immediately clear. When you just look at this chart, but some things are clear. I think Venus is interesting. What's interesting about Venus is that Venus is at 2816 Libra at the time of a full moon, and there was a new moon on October the 21st. So the new moon on October the 21st was at 2822 Libra. So this Venus is exactly conjunct the new moon. So it's like the new moon is really manifesting with this full moon. So it may be that something that started with that new moon on the 21st is really, really starting to manifest now with the full moon. I'm not quite sure how to interpret that, but it just may be more powerful than usual. I mean, we always say that with the full moon, the new moon, the new moon, the potential of a new moon comes into being with the full moon, but I think it really does. And perhaps because it's Venus, it may say something about relationships, perhaps, or other people. So with Venus hitting the degree of the new moon, maybe for some of us, something that has started on October the 21st, or someone you met on October the 21st at the time of the new moon, it all becomes clear, it all becomes obvious. So perhaps you should think back to what was going on October the 21st. It's difficult. I mean, it all seems a blur. Time just goes faster and faster. But it is kind of interesting the way Venus does pick up on that new moon. Now, another thing about this new moon, this full moon, which is not perhaps immediately apparent, is some of the midpoints, and just looking at it from a perspective of the 90-degree dial, which is, I think that's something that we should do. We should be aware of what midpoints this picks up on. So turning to the 90-degree dial. So we've got a full moon. So because it's the 90-degree dial, the 90-degree dial treats the full moon as like a conjunction. And so what midpoints is the new moon on? So this new moon is on the Mars Jupiter midpoint, for one thing. So this full moon on the Mars Jupiter midpoint. So Mars Jupiter as a midpoint is about action. It's about wanting to take action, feeling impatient, feeling we've got to make something happen. And so some people with this full moon say, well, that is enough. It's particularly now that Mars is in Sagittarius. Let's make it happen. Let's do it. And so if you feel that, that might be how you respond to this full moon. But is that the right way of looking at this full moon? I mean, sure, there might be the temptation to take action, but that could be dangerous. And we have another midpoint to consider, and this full moon is on the Mars Zeus midpoint. So Zeus is a hypothetical planet that Uranian astrologers use. So we've got we've got the full moon on the Mars Jupiter midpoint and the Mars Zeus midpoint. So the fact that there it is. You can see it all together. There is there's Mars, there's Jupiter. You see, there's a Jupiter and Zeus are making an aspect. They're making a hard aspect at the moment, quite a close hard aspect, and Mars is picking up on that. So as far as I can see, that's quite dramatic. So when you're talking about Zeus, what is Zeus about? Zeus is often about explosions, gunshots. It's quite into sort of war. And so the full moon might represent the realization perhaps of violence, perhaps a cycle of violence, or perhaps someone feels that they absolutely have to do something, that they have to respond. There is no choice. At least that's how it might be experienced. So I think that there is something quite explosive about this full moon, which is not immediately obvious. And there are other things which are baked into this full moon. I've already mentioned the fact that Mars's opposition. Mars's opposition Uranus. So that tells us something about this lunation. And then there is Hades. Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Hades. So there you see Mars is shown as being opposition Hades in this chart. So when you've got an opposition to Hades, that in the dial that suggests that that tells you it's a semi-square or a sesquiquadrate. So it's a very close Mars sesquiquadrate Hades, and so that may say something about the quality of this full moon. Mars is about anger. Hades is about evil, doing things which are just basically not very nice, and so that kind of adds to what this full moon is about. I think that it may actually be quite a difficult full moon. And another thing going on is one aspect or midpoint we've got today is we've got Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So here's Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. That's just a general feature of today. So Venus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Venus is on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. And Venus is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. This is not just about the full moon. This is perhaps something I should have mentioned in the introduction, that Venus is on some very dangerous midpoints today. And that may say something about women, how women behave, how women are treated. That's one way of looking at it. Venus could also just say something about war. I do believe that Venus is about war, particularly victory rather than war itself. But Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it seems quite deathly, quite dangerous. So it might be something about some high-profile woman and what that woman is doing. So that is perhaps a way of looking at today. And then there is astrocartography, doing the map for. Let's look at a map of the world and places which seem to me to be highlighted. So the astrocartography just shows, which places, at the exact time of this full moon, where do you have planets on the angles. So, for example, if you go through sort of New York, Washington D.C., that Mars and Uranus are on the ascendant. So Washington D.C., New York, that's somewhere we should be looking at. Washington D.C. is, of course, the capital of the United States, so it may not just be about what's going on in Washington D.C., on the streets of Washington D.C., but also what America is up to. And if you look at Caracas, remember Venezuela, we've been talking about Venezuela, there's been all sorts of theories or ideas that America, the United States, is on the point of intervening in Venezuela, and Saturn is on the IC. If you set a chart for Caracas, and moving to Eurasia, I just talked about Dublin and Ireland, and Mars, at the time of this full moon, Mars is on the midheaven, and so that's somewhere to look at. And I think that's the main theme. The Mars Uranus is across Uranus is rising through Western India and into Pakistan. that may be another part of the world we should be looking at. So let me now just pick up on some of those charts. So here is the full moon, relocated to Washington D.C. So Washington D.C. you've got 211 Sagittarius rising. So in other words, you've got Mars, rising. You've got Uranus on the descendant, and so I'm thinking that this is quite dangerous. We don't know what the government is planning. You've got South Node on the IC as well, and so that South Node on the IC may say something about the country's reputation. I mean, the South Node can be about a sort of bad reputation, but it seems to be quite stormy. This full moon chart set for Washington D.C. Now that might be about foreign policy, Uranus on the descendant. It could be about internal policy. I mean, I know that you've got big struggles with Congress talking about is it food stamps and was it SNAP payments? So there's a lot of conflict, and I know we've got a government shutdown, but yeah, it's a stormy chart, and I think that people do seem to be doubling down here with this Mars opposition Uranus. So that's the United States. If we set the chart, reset the chart for Dublin, I mean, I've just talked about Dublin, but I mean, I know that people in Ireland are not happy. They're not happy anywhere. They're not happy in the UK. So it's not like one country is any worse than other countries. It's often said, isn't it? That people say, oh, look how bad it is for this particular leader. He's got an approval rating of 19%. Things must be really disastrous. But the thing is, every single leader across the world has appalling approval ratings. I mean, America not so much, but certainly I don't know about what Trump's current approval ratings, but certainly in Europe, every single leader has disastrous approval ratings, across the board, and certainly in Ireland as well. I know Ireland's had a new president, but having Mars exactly on the midheaven, I mean exactly on the midheaven at the time of this full moon, Uranus exactly on the IC. So this makes me think that something may be going on in Ireland. We already know that something is going on in Ireland. Ireland, has got all sorts of issues, a lot to do with immigration, but maybe things are coming to a head. That this could, as I suggested last time I looked at Dublin, is talking about perhaps civil unrest. So it's not looking easy that here for Dublin. And for Ireland. So two countries perhaps to think about that seem to be really impacted by this would be Ireland and the United States, and Venezuela. Here's a chart set for Venezuela. If we set the chart for Caracas, the full moon for Caracas, there's a Saturn Neptune conjunction. We've got the IC on the Saturn Neptune conjunction. So this indicates that it is a really difficult time for the Venezuelan government. And as far as a few charts are concerned, looking at kind of transits, I don't know if you're in Denmark. I noticed that Denmark's Venus is at 13 degrees 41 Taurus. So So Denmark came into being on June the 5th, 1949. And so Venus, I don't know what that means for Denmark. Now, Venus might represent a woman, might represent the country's, for example, the country's prime minister. What's her name? Is it Mette Frederiksen? I mean, she's still prime minister, is that right? And so that Venus is hit by the full moon. It may say something else. It could talk about women in general in Denmark. And just quickly looking at the chart of Mette Frederiksen, Mette Frederiksen has her Uranus at 13 degrees 1 Scorpio. So Mette Fredriksen's Uranus is opposition Denmark's Venus, and that link is activated by the full moon. So I don't know anything about Denmark, but if you are in Denmark or you know about Denmark, maybe you need to look at what's happening, over the next couple of weeks. And going back to the United States, I've already said that I think that this full moon could have quite a dramatic effect on Washington D.C. in terms of America in general, people doubling down, people being very very stubborn. And here is a chart of Trump's inauguration, and presidents are elected since the 1930s. Sorry, presidents they are inaugurated on January the 20th, unless the inauguration falls on a Sunday, I think. But generally, it's January the 20th, and so at January the 20th at noon, the ascendant tends to be at 14, will be at 14 Taurus approximately. So this full moon falls across the ascendant of the inauguration chart of Donald Trump. And so something is coming to a head, something is becoming clear, and perhaps people are becoming aware of what the implications are of Trump being president, or perhaps it is the president himself, in terms of his policies, understanding something. It may not be a particularly easy understanding, but it is an understanding nonetheless. Switching to the Middle East, Hamas. So here's the horoscope of Hamas. I don't know what time Hamas came into being. I've gone for December the 14th, 1987. And Hamas has its Mars at 1318 Scorpio. So this full moon, you've got the sun conjunct Hamas's Mars, and you've got the moon opposition it. So Hamas perhaps has to make important decisions here. What are they going to do? Now, the full moon could be about the realization of what they can get away with, the realization of where the armed struggle is leading. But you kind of think with Hamas, they seem to sort of assume violence is the solution, and with full moon on their Mars, they might be tempted to, in some way, up the pace with violence and to do something, or it may mean that they're just going to get attacked. It's something to do with Gaza and Hamas and how Hamas are going to respond to the situation. And we shouldn't forget that that Hamas has Mars conjunct Pluto. And moving to France, Jourdain Bardella, one of the leaders of the National Rally, the sort of right-wing party in France. I don't know whether right-wing is quite the right word, because a lot of the National Rally's economic policies are pretty left-wing, so it's always a bit complicated thinking about left and right. But he has his moon at 13 degrees 43. So Jourdain Bardella has his lunar return, and so his moon is highly activated. That may say nothing about his political career. I mean, maybe he's got moon in the 5th house in Taurus. That may say something about relationships, or I don't know anything about his private life. That may say something about what he enjoys doing. But having a full moon on his moon, if you're a politician, a leading politician, the moon represents the people, and how and what he does, how he responds, and he may feel he has to do something. So then there seems to be a possibility that he's going to be influenced by this lunation, and it's a difficult time for him. I mean it's a stressful time. He's got Saturn relatively close to the opposition of his Venus. So it's not entirely easy, is it? And finally, we have got Kirilo Budanov, who is, I believe, he's head of Ukrainian military intelligence, and I don't actually know his time of birth, but he's a Capricorn, born on January the 4th, 1989. sorry, 1986. And he has got his Mars at 12 degrees 38 Scorpio. And there is one story that, that sort of attempted helicopter incursion in near Pokrovsk, when it was his doing, that they were up to something. And so, if you're Budanov, life is difficult. It's not just that you're having to worry about the Russians, you're also having to worry about internal politics and how well you get on with Zelensky. And this full moon on his Mars, may encourage him to do something. Maybe there's something he has to do. It might be he's contemplating something against the Russians, or maybe he is a victim, or maybe his life is threatened. I mean, not necessarily by the Russians. There are all sorts of internal factions in Ukraine. And I mean, I don't have a time of birth for him. I mean, he does have Mars conjunct Pluto, like Hamas. His Mars-Pluto conjunction is not as close as Hamas's Mars-Pluto conjunction, but he might be someone to look out for. But we're not going to know. I mean, Budanov is a very secretive figure. Obviously, he's very careful what he does and where he goes. And so if something happens in Budanov's life, we might not know about it. But if I were to be advising Budanov, I would perhaps advise some caution with this full moon, right on his Mars. So that's it. That's all I've got to say about the full moon. I think this full moon could be a bit difficult. I think it's quite a powerful full moon. It doesn't seem to be powerful at first, but when you actually drill down, it is. It is. So anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.